Hola, I'm Jorge Ramos.
And I'm Paola Ramos.
And this is The Moment.
So unbelievably, Dad, this is only week 2, week 3. I don't even know what day of the week it is, but we just began 2026. It feels like we've been living 50, 40 years already. I can confirm that I have more gray hairs today than I did 2 weeks ago.
You're blaming me for that, right?
It is partly your fault. Thank you. Por das tus canas. But no, in a very serious note, here's what we know from the last couple of days and what these days potentially tell us about where the United States is heading for the rest of the year. We've witnessed the killing of Renee Good. We've witnessed a country that is now full of mass protests from coast to coast protests that are responding to these ICE raids and this violence. And then you look across the southern border, and you see the United States that's not just intervening in Venezuela, but also simultaneously eyeing Cuba and Colombia and Mexico as the country is pondering what this Monroe Doctrine and influence abroad looks like.
So because of this, we want to make things a little different. We're going to be joined by Daniel Alarcón. Daniel is a journalist, a colleague, executive producer of The Moment. He's going to be guiding the conversation. And this conversation is important because we have to make sense of the country that we're becoming and also to find out what 2026 is demanding from us. So we're going to take a break and we'll be right back.
Good morning, Paola. Good morning, Jorge. Happy New Year. It's good to see you both.
Feliz 26.
Feliz 26, exactly.
What a year. It's only been a few days.
Someone on the team said it was the 40th of January. So we're speaking to you on the 40th of January. And I wanted to start talking about immigration, which was obviously one of the big through lines of 2025 and will certainly be one of the big stories of 2026. The aggressive change in policy that we saw under the Trump administration, and along with the continued sense of betrayal that a lot of Americans are feeling as they observe the way the administration is handling this sensitive issue. Just a few days ago, on January 7th, we all saw the video of the fatal shooting of Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old U.S. citizen killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota during an ICE operation. This is, of course, the second fatal shooting by an ICE agent in the past 4 months. And then there was a shooting at a traffic stop by ICE just a few days later on the West Coast. So, but I do want to zoom in on last Wednesday morning in Minneapolis. And Jorge, someone specifically reached out to you in the aftermath of that incident, right?
Yeah, exactly. What happened is that Carolina Ortiz just got in touch with us. Carolina has been living in Minneapolis since she was 2 years old, and she's part of the nonprofit Comunidades Organizando el Poder y la Acción. So unlike many people around the country, Daniel, that were taken by surprise by what happened in Minneapolis, they were not. I mean, her organization was actually bracing for something like this. And then, obviously, she witnessed what happened immediately after the shooting of Renee Good.
So to help us understand what this is all looking like on the ground, we invited Carolina to come speak with us on The Moment and hear from her. So let's welcome Carolina Ortiz to this conversation.
So Carolina, so what happened? How did you learn what was happening, and how fast did you get to the place where it actually happened?
So COPAL, our organization, is part of the Immigrant Defense Network, which is a group of over 100 organizations that have been really supporting with all of the ICE activity here in Minnesota. We started receiving calls a little bit after 9, letting us know that they had seen ICE vehicles on Portland Avenue and that they could see something was happening. I also at the same time received a call from a staff member who actually lives on that block and said, hey, you need to get out here. We need to get observers out. And this person is usually very calm and is even under high pressure. So when I heard her and the tone of her voice being so alerting, I that was a sign to me that she was afraid and something might be escalating soon. So that's why we were able to have 5 people from the team on the spot. Again, one because one was living there and she was close by.
So the shooting had happened by then. By the time you received the phone call, the shooting had happened.
So Maria, who was living in that area, was able to be there, and that she was actually in the site when the shooting occurred. I arrived shortly after when the people were trying to push back, ask questions, trying to figure out what had occurred. And it was as soon as I got off the vehicle, there was at least 20 ICE cars that were blocking the entryway. So I know that there has been a few other reports where they say that they couldn't get to Renee as quickly as possible because the vehicles were in the way. They were completely blocking all of the entry. As soon as I got off the vehicle, there was one individual who was recording, not saying anything, keeping a distance, solely there to record. And one of the ICE agents began insulting them with just everything and anything you can imagine. And at that point, the ICE agent went over and pushed them to the ground.
Oh,
While that was occurring, I had a second team member who was diagonal from me, who was basically alerting that they had irritants that they were going to put out. We had masks, but they were very limited. So we were also trying to figure out how do we make sure that we get the masks to the people that are in the area, trying to get folks away. At the same time, we had another team member that was trying to de-escalate because emotions were very high. Not only had the shooting occurred, but we were seeing continuous violence acts against our community members happening all around us. So we were trying to also figure out how do we de-escalate? How do we make sure that we don't fall into the trap of responding and becoming violent and doing everything possible to remain calm. It was hard. I mean, it's hard to tell people to calm down when they just experienced a murder in front of them. It's hard to tell people to calm down when you're hearing shots all around and don't know if they're gunshots or if they're irritants or if they're rubber bullets. So it was definitely a very high intense moment for me and for the team.
Were you able to see Renee? Was she alive when you got there?
What I was able to see, I mean, at that point they were waiting for help. What I saw, I, my impression was she's gone. She's not alive. As we've seen other footage from the what I was seeing from my perspective, I mean, it looks like her body is lifeless at that point. I think what was also really triggering for many people is just seeing the blood, really the extensive level of blood on the street and in the snow because we have a lot of snow on the streets right now, so you could just see the trail of blood. Um, and I think just many people could see that or believe that she had passed away, and that also just did not help with people asking questions and demanding answers.
you know, as community organizers, in a way, you've been preparing for this moment for years at this point, right? And I think so much of what organizers have to do is lead, and really be there to support everyone. But I'm wondering how you're feeling right now, and if you really do feel afraid.
I am definitely afraid. I'm afraid because we have a full team that we are trying to make sure that they're supporting community, but it's hard to say, hey, let's support community when we're all going through this and we all have families and friends who haven't been outside their homes for weeks, who we have to take to get some medication because they haven't been able to talk to their doctors. It's hard, and it is very difficult to keep up with it all. We've also been receiving many messages on social media from folks who don't agree with our work, who don't think that we should be doing this, and have
What do
pushed
they
back.
tell you?
So it is. There's been several posts on social media channels where they say, hey, Copal specifically naming us, saying they have over 10,000 people that they've trained. They're doing this unlawfully. They're not following the laws, which we are. I mean, we're following the Constitution. We're following our rights as human beings, and we're making sure that we have everything aligned. But some people just don't agree with that. So it is terrifying, but at the same time, that's exactly what they want. They want us to be afraid. They want us to not speak up. They want to taint the narrative to their liking. And as afraid as I am, there's just too much going on, and the stakes are too high in order to cave into that fear. So If anything, I think it's a reminder that we have to keep going.
In the aftermath of the shooting, you saw the Trump administration double down. Right now, you have Kristi Noem essentially saying that they're on the verge of sending even more federal agents to Minneapolis. Have you, as an organization, have you all had to change your tactics? Are you thinking about the future in a different way, given what the administration is signaling?
Yes, completely. And we, through the helpline that we have, just yesterday, we received over 400 calls of community members that were
400.
reporting 400 calls. We had one instance where somebody was critically ill, and she basically said, "I don't have anybody to take me to urgent care, and I also know that ICE is in urgent care. Will I get deported if I go?" We were able to get her to urgent care, but surely enough, as soon as she was out, there was already ICE agents outside. She went and hid in one of the bathrooms and called and said, "Hey, I don't know what to do. I'm terrified. I don't know what to do." We had another family call in that they are the caregiver for their sister who is not able to be mobile, and she wasn't answering the call. They were terrified something had happened, and they just don't have a safe way to get to them. I don't think that it's clear to outside states how bad it is in Minnesota, but it truly does feel like a civil war. It feels like we are going through, even just driving to work feels like it's a risk. Um, and it's dangerous because it's really not the fear of being deported. It's the fear of how inhumane the detentions have been and how people have been treated, to the point of somebody getting a heart attack while they're getting arrested and them not getting them the medical care that they need. And that is another level of extreme violence.
Before we let you go, Carolina, I think there's a lot of listeners that are in different parts of the city. I'm talking to you from New York City. There was a protest here. There have been ongoing protests. And I think one of the questions that people keep asking is what does one do? So for those that are wondering what they can do, what's your response?
Before I respond, I have seen how this is twisted in other channels. Um, we have to make sure that we are engaging with organizations, networks that have people that are able to guide them and train them in a way that, again, follows the laws and doesn't put them in danger, and allows them to take a step back if they don't feel safe. I say this because there are several groups that are doing trainings who are just, again, I don't blame them. There's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of anger. I feel the rage, but at the same time, we have to make sure that we don't fall into the trap, that we don't put other people in danger. So I will say, reach out to organizations that have a training figured out where you are able to ask questions, where you are able to feel safe. And then the second thing is make sure that if you are not directly affected, we need you. We need your support. Right now, as bad as the situation has been, we have so many people that have reached out and said, "Hey, I want to volunteer. I want to deliver food. I want to help in any way possible." And that is a little piece of relief that we have, knowing that there's so many people that are able and willing to say, "Hey, I'm not affected, but it's our dignity, it's our human rights um, that are in jeopardy, and I'm here to support." I know it takes a lot of courage. I'm feeling it. I feel the fear. I know what it's a high risk, but I mean, right now it's really just an ask for people to be in solidarity and to be able to help one another in the best way that possible.
Carolina, gracias. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you, Carolina.
We need your eyes, Carolina. You know that, right?
Thank you. Yes, we're here and we're ready.
Okay, well, we're back. That was obviously very, very sobering and chilling to hear that frontline report. In some ways, this is the killing of Renee Good is the logical culmination of an escalation of the tactics that we've seen from ICE over the course of this year or so of the Trump administration. I think it's worth noting the administration's response and the tone of that response, which has been adversarial, aggressive, accusing Renee Good without evidence of being a paid provocateur or even a domestic terrorist. So there's a lot to unpack here. And I guess, but my real question is, given these increasingly repressive tactics, are we ever going to reach a point where they pay a political cost for this?
I don't think so, not right now, Daniel, not with the Trump administration, because even the narrative, the explanation of what happened doesn't make any sense. We saw the videos, you've seen the videos, and it is very clear that she's not a domestic terrorist. That's the most important thing. I was rereading on Tyranny, Timothy Snyder, and he says something really important. You have to believe your eyes. And when suddenly the government gives you an explanation that doesn't match what you are seeing, there's something wrong. This is what he said. He says, believe in truth. To abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, then no one can criticize power. And I think that's exactly where we are at this moment. We have seen what happened in Minneapolis. I think the worst is yet to come. I want to hear what you think, Paola. I think the worst is yet to come. But we have to believe our eyes, and in this case, in this specific case, not the government explanation.
Yeah, I think that's the first thing that comes up to me. I think to your point, Dad, this idea of believing your eyes, I think this administration has been training their officers and their troops and the National Guard to see immigrants and anyone and anything that sort of opposes Trumpism through a very specific lens, right? So that by the time that an ICE agent sees someone like Renee Good, she's not necessarily seen as a protester, she's seen as a, quote, radical lefty, and yes, as a domestic terrorist, and they won't back down from that. And I think that's the fear, right? You see in the aftermath of her death, a Trump administration that is simply doubling down and trying to escalate. Kristi Noem wants to send even more officers to Minneapolis. The administration keeps justifying her death. The administration is now entering a year where ICE has this enormous budget. Let's remember that Congress passed $75 million, if I'm not correct, that will go directly to ICE, making it billion. There you go, $1 billion. Yeah, so $75 billion that will now go directly to this law enforcement agency, and in all of this within a Stephen Miller that is still unsatisfied with the numbers that they have. Right, he's demanding at least 3,000 people being detained per day. We know that they're not meeting that quota, and so they're hungry for more. And I think that to your question, Ani, like, will anything stop them? You know, are there some political repercussions? I don't think they care, because for them, I think this goes beyond the politics, right? This goes beyond winning or losing. This is a mission for them, right? Like this mass deportation agenda is a moral mission to change the makeup of the United States in a way that reflects their, what Trumpism is about, which is a very specific makeup of the U.S.
And the lesson is terrible. The lesson is terrible, Daniel. So, because if this happened to a U.S. citizen, just imagine what has happened to many immigrants, some of them who are undocumented in this country. And I was seeing some of the numbers. So far, more than 600,000 people have been deported, and 1.6 have been self-deported. So Donald Trump is not yet a deported-in-chief, but Barack Obama deported about 3 million people, but he's getting close to that. He's getting close to that just in the first year. So I sense what Carolina was telling us about the fear in Minneapolis is everywhere. It's not only in Minneapolis, it's in Chicago, it's in New York, it's in Los Angeles, and this is something that I have never lived in this country.
There was a quote from a conversation that Stephen Miller had with Jake Tapper from CNN that I want to play for you guys. I think it's very chilling. If we could just run it right here.
We live in a world in which you can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else, but we live in a world, in the real world, Jake, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world that have existed since the beginning of time.
So I think the thing that I found most disturbing about this, and obviously in this context, he's defending and justifying the administration's arrest of Nicolas Maduro and the incursion into Venezuela, which we'll discuss at great length later on. But I think what I found chilling about it was that this justification of violence and power and might makes right seems to be not just a reflection of international, foreign policy, but quite clearly domestic policy, which is what we're seeing with ICE and with this kind of full-throated defense of what we all saw as a murder.
Yeah, and the idea that the only important thing is power, and we know that is not true. The important thing is liberty. The important thing is democracy. The important thing is justice. I was reading, as I'm sure you did, the New York Times interview with Donald Trump this week, and when they asked him what are your limits, he said there's no limits. The only limits, he said, my morality and my mind. And the headline from the New York Times is very, very telling. It says, Trump asserts his global power has one limit, himself. I mean, that's not a democracy. I mean, that's not what I learned. That's not why I came to this country. That's precisely the opposite. And now we are, this is new for us, completely new territory for us, Paola.
I think when you just look at the images, of sort of the way that we've normalized ICE raids across the country, the deployment of the National Guard, and then you look at across the map and you land in the intervention in Caracas, I think that image is about a Trump administration that is essentially taking back what they believed belongs to them. Taking back American streets, taking back the type of citizens that get to call this country theirs, taking back the Western Hemisphere. And they've told us when Donald Trump begins his second term on January 20th, and he then follows up with the same rhetoric on the State of the Union, he himself invokes manifest destiny in his own speech, right? He says something along the lines of, this is our manifest destiny. Less than a year after he says those words, we hear the Trump administration publicly saying a very similar thing, which is the Western Hemisphere is ours. And so, yes, this is, to your point, Dad, this is about power. This is about them extending their influence. And perhaps, of course, as you see very vividly in Venezuela, this is about oil. It's about some economic incentive. But I think more than anything, the same way that the Monroe Doctrine and Manifest Destiny were anchored in this kind of a moral calling, that justify their actions and the violence, I think someone like Trump and Stephen Miller also believe that it is their divine duty. And these are words that sometimes someone like Steve Bannon, right, has called Donald Trump, this like divine.
In religious terms, yes.
Exactly. And so I think when you merge all of those things together, yes, like this is their moment, to not only make America great again, and to not only make this about America first, but make this about all of America. It can all be yours. And that's a story that they can sell. And these interventions in Venezuela, whatever is to come, like that is a quote unquote moral story, since you use the word morality, Dad. Like that's a moral story that we have sold time and time and time again for centuries at this point, right? The morality of the United States justifying its interventions abroad around this idea that we get to be the good guys, to rid all of you bad guys of communism, and we get to step in. Like, that's an old story.
I want to get to that later, but I do think that and I'll just say this and we can discuss a bit more, what's been interesting to me, and I say interesting in quotes, obviously, but about the rhetoric around Venezuela is that they aren't attempting to justify it with any kind of nation building or democracy. It is about resource extraction, and it is about money, and they're being pretty explicit about that. But before we shift to that, the ICE escalation that ICE is ramping up all over the United States and in a lot of blue states and democratic cities, like what we've seen in Minneapolis, is only part of their enforcement. The other thing that I'm keeping an eye on is a lot of the cases they're going to get to the Supreme Court this year, including many that affect or could affect Latinos and immigrants here in the United States. And I wanted to ask specifically about the Trump versus Barbara case, which is the birthright citizenship case. What are your thoughts on that? What are you expecting is going to happen this year when the Supreme Court hears those really, truly important cases?
Yeah, I don't know you, Paula, but just a few years ago, I was said he has no chance whatsoever. But now the composition of the Supreme Court is completely different. I'm not sure. Let me tell you just a quick story. As you know, in 2015 in Dubuque, Iowa, I went to talk to Donald Trump. There was no possibility. And I was ejected by a bodyguard. What many people don't know is that after I was ejected from the press conference, I was able to come back. And then I had a conversation, I would say more than 10 minutes with Donald Trump. That was not reported by most media. But what's so interesting, Daniel and Paola, is that I was asking him about the wall, but I was asking him precisely about his idea of trying to get rid of birthright citizenship. And I told him, no, you cannot do that because that's part of the Constitution. And here is what he said. Many people believe that an act of Congress can change that, and the courts will react to that. So in other words, since 2015, Donald Trump had this idea that he could change birthright citizenship, and that would affect incredibly the way we live in the United States.
I think we asked Anthony Romero from the ACLU this precise question, Daniel, when we talked to him, right? Like, what are actually the chances that the Supreme Court actually rolls back birthright citizenship? And he seemed to be pretty positive, right, Dad, that this wouldn't happen. I think, like you, like I have become so just skeptical around everything that I think it's a 50-50 chance at this point. But the idea that in the year 2026, right, we're debating whether or not the 14th Amendment is constitutional is ridiculous, but that's the norm now. And I think, I guess what gives me pause is that this is such a big part of their agenda, right? Mm-hmm. Because this is what Stephen Miller, again, the architect of Trump's immigration agenda, like, this for him is everything. You know, this idea that the children of immigrants do not deserve to call the United States their home, which is precisely what the 14th Amendment was trying to defend us all from, right? The capacity that we have as a country to discriminate others, right? To cast Black people and brown people as inferior as white people, which is precisely why the 14th Amendment then came to power. Like, we can do that as a country. You know, we know we can get there. We know that if Stephen Miller and Donald Trump get what they want, that's where we would be headed. And so just to think that potentially we could go down that road again gives me so much pause, but that's the norm. Let's trust the courts. Let's trust the rule of law. So I don't know. I'm skeptical.
I think that's the scariest part of all this is that what's legal is exactly what the Supreme Court says is legal.
Mm. Yeah.
You know, the moment at which the Supreme Court says this is allowed, then it doesn't matter what the norm is. It doesn't matter what, you know, we feel or our interpretations of a pretty clear amendment to the Constitution. It is what it is. It's what they say it is. And, you know, he has a majority on the court, a very clear one.
And imagine what that can look like, right? Like, I keep thinking about that scenario. Like, imagine if, in fact, they do roll this back. Like, what does that mean from state to state? And I think we've talked about this before, but this idea of like a crisis of statelessness, that suddenly you have all these children of immigrants that suddenly
with no country
belong to where?
Exactly,
right?
No country. Mexico, the U.S. I mean, yes, that would be incredible. I think this is also a reaction to the way the United States is changing, to the demographic changes that we're seeing. We know that in 2040, 2045, everyone is going to be a minority. And I think the rates, what's happening with ICE and what's happening at the Supreme Court, all of that are signals, are examples on how they want to change the destiny of the country.
Yes. Well, so it's not just this country they want to change. It seems what Paola was alluding to, the Americas more broadly. So let's take a quick break and we're going to come back and shift to foreign policy. Okay, so welcome back to The Moment. I wanted to connect a little bit of what's been happening at home with what we've been talking about that's been happening abroad, specifically, of course, the use of force in Venezuela, a place both of you have covered, which has been coupled with growing rhetoric about possible military actions in Colombia, Cuba, Mexico, Greenland, Iran. It's a long list of countries that the president has been threatening. I just want to ask you, when you hear this bellicose rhetoric, do you see a plan behind any of this? Like, what's he up to?
What I'm seeing, I think what we're seeing, again, we have to believe our eyes, Daniel and Paola. And I think what we're seeing is a new doctrine. It's not that Don Rowe doctrine that he's been promoted from the White House. Is even deeper and worrisome. I think we're talking about a new Trump doctrine, which could be summarized as America for Trump. It's not America para los americanos. No, it's not America for the Americans. No, it is America for Trump. And that's something, of course, has to do something with the Monroe Doctrine, but it's something completely new. And not only it has to do with foreign policy, it also has to do with resources. When the first press conference when Donald Trump announced the capture of Nicolás Maduro, he mentioned, I think, about 20 times the word oil, but not a single time the word democracy. And as we know, Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo González Urrutia, they're not part of the transition team that he put in place. So it's not only that the countries sort of belong to Trump from his point of view, but also that the resources, it is incredible to think that Venezuela's oil now belongs to the United States. I mean, you can argue whatever you want, but Venezuela's oil is Venezuela. It's Venezuela's. It's for Venezuelans, not for anybody else. That's the new Trump doctrine.
Yeah, I think it's very clear at this point that it's about power, and I think that power can look like and will potentially look like different in the different quote unquote countries that he has an eye on, right? I think in Venezuela there's a very pragmatic transactional approach there, where oil obviously is top of mind, but then every now and then there are these concessions, right? The release of 9 political prisoners last week, I think, signals something to his base in Florida that need to see those images in order to justify the fact that that Delcy is still in power.
And as we record this on Monday, that he just released a dozen more or so.
Exactly. And so I think those are kind of the concessions that allow for this like pragmatic, very ruthless approach. But then I think of Cuba, right? Cuba doesn't have the same, obviously, economic incentives as Venezuela. But I think in Cuba, I think people like Marco Rubio, perhaps even Stephen Miller, I think they also see this Latin American approach as also as an ideological crusade, right? To finally try and get the continent to reverse back to this kind of like right-wing ideology, right? To really be the ones that crush the Cold War era left-wing populist movement that erupted throughout the continent. And I think for someone like Marco Rubio to be able to symbolically, right, kind of finally end that battle, to be the ones to claim that they did what JFK was never able to do with the Bay of Pigs. I think there's something to that perhaps is just like a really good story that they want to own. Now, I think the aftermath of all of this is really interesting, right? Like you don't crush Chavismo just by invading. No, you don't crush castrismo just by going in. And I think what history also shows us is that all of these different interventions, right, plant the seed to these then anti-imperialist movements that historically give rise to these like strongmen anti-imperialist voices from Chavez to Castro. And so there's a whole movement, I think, that they keep underestimating.
And let me just say that there's no regime change right now in Venezuela. There's Chavismo without Chavez and Chavismo without Maduro. And let me also be very, very clear. I think the world is a better place with one less dictator. I have no question about it. I mean, Nicolás Maduro was not a legitimate president, but at the same time, the way it was done by the United States, it was done in an illegal way. So you can reject Maduro and you can reject Trump. I mean, Trump did it without Congress authorization that was required by U.S. law. Donald Trump did it going against all international law. The UN Charter clearly says that you have to treat countries as an equal, that you have to negotiate a peaceful settlement of disputes, and you are prohibited from using force. Well, Donald Trump did exactly the contrary to this. And then the president, Daniel, I think, how can you tell Putin not to invade more territory in Ukraine, or China not to do the same in Taiwan, or even in our own continent? Mexico is very worried right now that Donald Trump is going to use drones to attack drug cartels within Mexican territory. That hasn't been done since 1914 in Veracruz, and then 1916 and 17 with Pancho Villa. So the precedent that this has created is truly incredible and far-reaching.
Yeah, the implications of which I think we still haven't fully understand and we won't see for years, maybe decades.
You're in Cucuta, Daniel, no? Let me just ask you. So what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I'm in Cucuta because I wanted to get to Caracas, but the consensus was that it was too dangerous. They've been arresting and detaining journalists both at the border and when they arrive in Caracas. But I flew to Cucuta to just try to get a sense of how things are from the Colombian perspective. Cucuta is the border with Venezuela. It is basically the ground zero of this humanitarian crisis and exodus of Venezuelans. By between 8 and 10 million Venezuelans have left. There's almost 3 million Venezuelans in Colombia. You could argue that the Venezuelan migrant and refugee crisis has transformed politics and culture in every country in Latin America and the U.S. I mean, how many Americans had heard of Trinidad before Trump made an issue of it in the last election? And 27%, roughly a quarter of the population of Cucuta is Venezuelan. It's in some ways Cucuta is an extension of Venezuela in the same way that Táchira is an extension of Colombia. The culture, the slang, the food, the music is all very similar. Everyone I've spoken to, every single person I've spoken to has family on the other side of the border. Many people are binational. There was a time when Venezuela was prosperous and stable and Colombia was the opposite, that parents of children born in Cucuta would cross the border just to register them in Venezuela so their babies could have the benefit of a Venezuelan passport and Venezuelan work permits and all that stuff. Obviously, times have changed. You can buy, bolívares as souvenirs here in the plaza in Cucuta. People make origami out of them, these worthless bills. And people are worried. People are worried because they don't know what's going to happen next. Cucuta, specifically El Norte de Santander, this region, and Colombia more broadly, are not prepared for another mass exodus of the kind that was seen here in 2015, 2017, 2019. The ELN, the Ejército de Liberación Nacional, which is one of the armed groups that did not sign a peace treaty with the Colombian government, is still very active on the border.
On which side are they, Daniel? On both sides, Colombia and Venezuela?
Both sides. They serve almost as the rear guard for the Madurismo and Chavismo, keeping the border hot. Because the myth for Venezuelans and for Chavez always was the idea that the U.S. was going to invade via Colombia, because Colombia has always been a partner and ally, military ally with the United States. So there's a tense calm here. Nothing's happening, but even normality and normalcy here in Cucuta is pretty alarming as an outsider. I mean, ELN just last year blew up the toll booth on the way to the border. They blew up the police substation that was right there next to one of the national monuments, the House of Santander. They kidnapped a few policemen the day I arrived, and on top of that, you add the regular sort of quotidian violence of microtráfico and small gangs. It's not exactly a pretty picture. I mean, the town's beautiful, people are very nice, and people seem calm, and the center is very very chill. But you start talking to people, and there's some alarming things happening here.
But what did I say, Daniel? Who's going to be controlling Venezuela? As we know, Delcy Rodriguez right now is controlling. Jorge Rodriguez still the president of the assembly. What are they telling you about the future of Venezuela? Well, this cannot remain. I mean, the dictatorship is still in place.
This can't remain, and I'm going this afternoon to a vigil for many of the Colombians who've been detained in Venezuela, and family members who are gathering at the border in the hopes that their loved ones will be released soon. But there's no indication that that's going to happen. I think one of the really startling things, and I feel almost naive confessing this to you and to our listeners, but when I spoke to Venezuelans here. And I asked them, what are your family members telling you about what's happening in Venezuela? They're like, we don't talk about that. They said that many people told me their family members have changed their status on WhatsApp to say "Libertad para Maduro," "Maduro secuestrado," "Abajo el imperialismo," or any kinds of these empty slogans that are sort of approved by the regime, and that they simply don't speak. They talk about
out of fear.
Yeah, of course. So Madurismo is still alive, even without Maduro, and people are very scared, and no one talks about what happened. So the Venezuelans that I was talking to, I was like, "How are things in Venezuela?" They're like, "You tell me. I don't talk to anybody about that. My family members, in order to protect them, we don't talk about the political situation. We don't talk about the kidnapping or capture, arrest, whatever you want to call it, of Nicolás Maduro." And they put these empty slogans on their status on WhatsApp to protect themselves and their family members.
But when you guys say this can't remain, the situation in Venezuela can't remain, why not? I mean, what indicates that?
I mean, I'll tell you what I think, just from conversations I've had. I think that the balancing act that Delcy Rodriguez has to pull off to keep the Chavistas at bay on one hand and keep, Trump and Marco Rubio at bay on the other, is a really delicate one. There's a lot of people who are very invested in holding on to the power and the money that they've attained through the corrupt Maduro regime, and they're not going to give that up easily.
But do they? I guess my question is are they giving anything up? Because I think, at least from afar, it just seems like what we're witnessing is just a kind of even more functioning form of, the Maduro regime simply stamped with an American approval. And so at the end of the day, I'm like, how for that 1% that is in control, how much is life changing for them?
I think it remains to be seen. I mean, the Guardian had a great phrase, which was they called it not regime change, but regime tweak.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And that is what it is now. I don't see the long-term viability of that. I mean, at some point, there has to be new elections. There has to be a government that is more representative of the Venezuelan people who have suffered so much.
Of course.
So much, and who deserve a say in the government that controls their own resources. And if that government wants to make a deal with the United States and sell them oil, that's fine. Yeah. But what's happening right now is
And that's
madness.
Precisely why I'm asking. I'm asking precisely because there doesn't seem to be any indication that that's of the interests of the United States and all of it. And I guess what scares me is that this kind of just solidifies that infrastructure, right? That they're not really pushing for what many Venezuelans believed Trump really cared about, right? Which was a form of quote unquote regime change or transition to democracy.
But they're still very hopeful. I mean, you were in Madrid when it happened. I was in Miami. I went to El Arepazo in Miami, and there were celebrations here in the United States, in Spain, and in Colombia, in Chile, but not in Venezuela. I think we have to be a little idealistic in the sense that I am expecting Venezuela to become a democracy. There's real conflict, but eventually, what we are all expecting, I'm expecting that, is that Venezuela will become a democracy. Otherwise, what's the purpose? And of course,
well, that's the point. That is the question. What is? That's
the purpose is democracy. I mean, otherwise, why do that? Maria Corina Machado just met the Pope. She's visiting Washington soon. So there's.
I don't remember the Pope having an army though. Okay.
Well, not now. The Swiss army would not be enough. But I'm truly expecting a change in Venezuela. Not soon. I think they learned the Iraq lesson. I was in Iraq in 2003. It was chaotic when they got rid of the police, the army. Every government official was gone. It was complete chaos. Thousands of people died after that. So Marco Rubio, to his credit, he said that there's a plan. And the first part of the plan is stabilization. I mean, let's just take him for his word. But after stabilization, there has to be democratization. And we haven't seen that yet.
The most generous interpretation of what's happening is this kind of realpolitik where, like, okay, what we want to do is prevent Venezuela from descending into chaos, which I should mention is precisely the fear that many observers here in Colombia have. If there's violence breaks out between warring factions of del Chavismo and Madurismo, then there will be another mass exodus, and we're right back where we started. So we'll see. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and hopefully talk about things that are a little bit more hopeful. We'll be right back.
Let's try.
Okay, we're back on the moment. I wanted to shift to something a little bit more hopeful. Paola immediately threw some skepticism on that, but okay. So I'm going to ask you, Paola, because I think this is important for our listeners, for our audience. Since Trump took office, the Democrats have scored some wins electorally, some major governors races in 2025, some new blood, new faces, a new generation of leaders, exemplified, of course, by Zoran Mamdani, most of all. At the same time, we saw the longest shutdown in U.S. history, after which Democrats signed a deal without having achieved much of anything in terms of protecting access to subsidies for the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, like most people know it. So politically, what do you see happening in 2026? We're just months away from the midterm elections as we speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. I think, and just to keep talking about Trump, because we love talking about Trump, I do think what's interesting is that his base, which was initially sold on this America First agenda, what's fascinating is that they're now somehow warming up to this, interventionist, imperialist vision of Trumpism. And so I think what would seem to be a more fractured MAGA around this, Venezuela/Latin America approach, I actually see them solidifying. And so I think that's something that I'm keeping an eye out. And then at the same time, if you ask any American voter right now, I think it still remains to be true that affordability is the number one issue, right? Like people are still really struggling to make ends meet. And then suddenly this word, affordability has become the buzzword that I think you see Democrats really running on. And I think there's already good examples from New York to New Jersey to Virginia, and in different counties across the country where Democrats are really leaning on that affordability message to lean into those Trump voters and independent voters that are simply thinking about the economy. Now, is that enough to mobilize them for a general election? No. But I think for the midterms, typically what we know is that the party in power loses a little bit of their momentum, and then the opposition party does well. I also think it's interesting to see the way that these ICE raids are mobilizing the coalition, right? I think what you see in Minneapolis is that people like, Carolina are not afraid to keep going back out on the streets. And I think a lot of activists will tell you that at one point, the movement felt fractured, right? The immigration movement was isolated from the criminal justice movement and the BLM movement. And I think suddenly you're starting to see some type of collective of message, which I would imagine will have some type of impact during these midterm elections. But I still think the Democrats are left with the same question that we were all pondering a year ago, which is who is the leader and what's the message beyond being anti-Trump and pro-affordability?
Jorge, you're in Miami, where I believe the first Democratic mayor in a generation just won last year. Do you agree with Paola? Are you seeing any other green shoots?
I see
for
signs of
Democratic
resistance. Yeah, I agree with you. What we saw in Miami, the first mayor, first woman in 30 years. The first Democrat in 30 years. Zoran Mamdani, of course, Gavin Newsom in California. And then protest and the some NGOs and organizations going to the streets in New York, in California, in Minneapolis. I see signs of resistance. Now, those are the good news. In other words, I'm maybe it's my immigrant mind, but I truly believe that at the end, the United States will do the right thing. The bad news from my point of view, Paola and Daniel, is that the worst is yet to come. Because until we have the midterms, and maybe the Congress is divided or taken by the Democrats, until then, it's going to be brutal. It's going to be so difficult. What happened in Minneapolis is just one example. And my problem with ICE raids right now is that the agents have taken the easier way right now to detain immigrants. And now I think they're gonna start going to public places, to schools, in front of hospitals. So I think from now until November is gonna be very, very difficult for the Latino community and for immigrants living in this country. So, and then obviously Trump understands that the height of his power is right now. That's the height of his power.
True.
And then in November hopefully it's gonna be different. But until then, we have to be ready for more things like what happened in Minneapolis, unfortunately.
Yeah, and maybe even an acceleration and an escalation as he might see that his power could be hemmed in by a Democratic majority in the House, for example.
Does that even stop him, though? I think that's also part of the story.
We've spoken about this a lot in editorial meetings. This idea that when are we in a constitutional crisis? And it seems like we've been in one since the moment he came down the escalator in 2015. But I think a next level of the democratic crisis that we're in, the constitutional crisis that we're in, is what if there is a Democratic House majority that is investigating, calling meetings, withholding budgets, doing all these kinds of things, and they just simply ignore it. And I'm almost at the point of doubting whether an electoral victory in November by the Democrats would have the kind of magic wand power that many on the left are hoping for. Yeah,
he didn't care, for instance, for Congress authorization for the military operation in Venezuela. So that's one thing. The other element, Daniel, has to do with the economy. I mean, the inflation is still there, and even though he says don't look at that, we are feeling it. As you mentioned, Paola, affordability is the most important thing right now. So it's not only that his power might be diminishing if the economy continues like this, it's also that the political calendar just might change things, but not now. I think the next few months are going to be very, very difficult.
So I want to end on a slightly different note. Excuse me. So, of course, Latinos are in the spotlight because we are being targeted, politically and in terms of immigration. On the other hand, you could argue that we've never had the kind of cultural power that we have right now, not only because we're helping shape the political conversation because of our very existence and because of the resistance people like Carolina Ortiz, whom we spoke to, are doing, ordinary people taking risks to point out things that they feel are unjust. But cultural power also in terms of, Latin music, in terms of Latin artists, comedians, etc. We obviously spoke with Leguizamo earlier in our last year as we started our season. I want to talk about Bad Bunny. Who I'm hoping to go see him in Medellin in just a few weeks. So he's performing this year's Super Bowl, which is obviously the biggest platform you could have. He's now the only artist to be Spotify's #1 for 4 years. The first Latin artist to place 100 songs on the Billboard Hot 100. And I, for one, and again, this might be a confession of naivete on my part, but I just was stunned by the reaction to him being named the performer at the Super Bowl halftime show. Were you? Or did you want to just sort of tell me why I'm an idiot here? Because I just couldn't. I couldn't believe that people cared.
He's probably the most popular artist in the world right now. Just because of that, most streamed artist in the world right now. So it makes absolute sense that he's gonna be in the Super Bowl, which might be the biggest show on earth. And I love what he said in the Saturday Night Live a few months ago. You have 4 months to learn a little bit of Spanish. And I think, we were talking just about the resistance. I think this is part of the resistance. Remember, Bad Bunny had decided not to perform in the United States, not for concerts, because of ICE raids. He's concerned that ICE is going to go to his concerts and that he's going to detain people. So he decided not to do that. So I'm all for it. I might be the only one in this group who's gone to 3 Bad Bunny concerts. I went to his last concert in San Juan, Puerto Rico. It was fantastic, just fantastic.
Yeah, and if you look at that concert, Dad, and I was also in San Juan,
Tú fuiste,
honestly,
claro,
like
tú fuiste.
if you look, but if you look around, everyone was there, right? It was white Americans were there, Black people were there, locals were there. Can I even say, when I went to San Juan, I also even saw Trump supporters that I know from Florida that
¿En serio?
were also in the Bad Bunny concert. And so I think just from a purely like economic standpoint, it makes sense because Bad Bunny sells, right? Because if you close your eyes and you put on his music, it doesn't matter what your politics are, it's likely that you will end up dancing. And so I think there's that. And then I think just symbolically, right, at a time where this administration is successfully dehumanizing so many Latinos and immigrants, just even if we only think about the last couple of days, for Bad Bunny to take the stage and do what I suspect he will do, right, which is what he always does, which is just lean into the pride and lean into the Spanish and lean into who we are, that's going to send a huge, huge, huge message. And just speaking of pride, if you turn on Netflix right now, the top 5 shows right now is Marcelo Hernandez too. And his comedy show right now on Netflix is incredible. He makes you laugh, but every other skit, there is talk about what it means to be a Cuban immigrant right now. And he's very clever around the way in which he injects pride and talks about the dynamics that are happening in this country. So I think you're right, Daniel. I think we're the counter story to all of this is that, we're really changing this country in like incredible and beautiful ways. And even if they try and crush it, it's hard.
We're not invisible. I mean, we're complaining of lack of representation, but when we see Bad Bunny, when we see Marcelo, we're not invisible. We're present. We're 65 million people in this country, 20% of the population, growing, the largest voting bloc in the country. No one can make it to the White House and in Congress without the Latinos. So we're there. So when we see someone making it, singing Ojitos Lindos and Nueva York and Baile Inolvidable, then something big is happening. So I love it. I'm not going to be there, but I'll be watching.
Great. Well, two takeaways. One, we need to get Marcelo on the show.
Yeah.
That's true.
Would love to talk to him. And
Marcelo,
two,
ven.
I didn't realize that it was a requirement to work at the moment to have seen a Bad Bunny show. So I'm going to get right on that.
You gotta go.
Tienes que ir, Daniel. You have to go.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of a family drama right now because I bought tickets to see Bad Bunny in Medellin, but I bought tickets for over 18, and our son, who's 13, almost 13, is a huge Bad Bunny fan. And if Carolina and I go without him.
You can't do that to him.
We can't do that to him. So we either have to put him in a trench coat with a mustache, or find new tickets. So I'll report back. But
Please.
Let's end there. I want to thank you, Paola and Jorge, as always, for your time, and just remind our listeners and viewers that we'll be back next week with the regular show. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
Gracias, Daniel. Thank you.
Daniel.
Gracias. Bye. Adios.
The Moment is a production of Radio Ambulante Studios in partnership with iHeart's My Cultura podcast network. Our staff includes Daniel Alarcón, Laura Rojas Aponte, and Miguel Santiago Colón, with help from Diego Corso, Elsa Liliana Ulloa, Paola Alian, and Natalia Ramirez. The CEO of Radio Ambulante Studios is Carolina Guerrero. Executive producers at iHeart are Leo Gomez and Arlene Santana. Mark Cannon, Pablo Cabrera, and Dylan Unger also serve as producers. Sound design, final mix, and theme song by Elias Gonzalez. Our hosts are Jorge Ramos and Paola Ramos. If you liked this episode, please share the word. Recommend the moment to anyone who might enjoy unpacking these complicated times with us. If you like the moment, pero también te gustan los podcasts en español, check out Radio Ambulante Studios. Our shows Radio Ambulante, El Hilo, and Central are really worth a listen. I'm Lisa Cerda. Thanks for listening.